Is it Carrie or Candace this morning?
Good morning, it's me, Carrie.
Hey, Carrie. I think we're going to get going because even though I don't have colleagues online yet, I've got a lot of questions to read into the record and the opening statements, so I think we better roll.
All right, give me 1 second.
Okay, yeah, I can wait, totally.
All right, 1 second is up. I'm ready when you are.
All right, great, awesome. 1 sec, pull up my statement here. All right. Calling this working session to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor, also the chair of the City Council's Ways and Means Committee. This working session today is being recorded. It's being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. It's part of the council's budget review process, which encompasses a whole sort of 35 public hearings and working sessions. And these working sessions are actually just for putting councilor questions for the departments on the record, which we do in the public because of open meeting law. But the real hearings, there's a bunch more of them next week, and your participation is invited if you want to come and testify at the end of any of them. They're all virtual. If you go to boston.gov/council-budget, you can see the whole calendar. And you can also find the way to upload a video of yourself or get the Zoom link to come and testify directly or email ccc.wm, that's WM for Ways and Means, so ccc.wm@boston.gov. You can send us your testimony there, or you can reach out by email if you're looking to figure out how to get involved. We've got 2 remaining hearings that are dedicated to public testimony. So those are on May 25th at 6 p.m. focused on BPS, and at June 3rd at 6 p.m. focused on any aspect of the budget. Those will go straight to public testimony, so you won't have to wait. And if the evenings are more convenient, but like I said, you can also come to any of the daytime hearings on the departments and speak at the end of them. And you can informally tweet us your questions using the hashtag BOSSBudget, BOS budget. And just one more time, that website on the council budget process is boston.gov/council-budget. Today's working session is on docket 0524 to 0526, orders for the FY22 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0527 to 0528, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations, and docket 0529 to 0531, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. And our focus today will be, well, it's manyfold, but we're going to talk about the Boston Public Library, which has its own dedicated hearing coming up. And then we're also going to talk about a set of departments that they're small, but they've been very significant during the pandemic, and they received significant budget increases in last year's budget as part of the move of some money from the police department budget. And so since a number of them really grew on the operating side last year, we want to check in on all of them and see what they've done with those funds and what the plan is for the year ahead. So those departments are the Office of Food Access, the Office of Language and Communications Access, the Office of Immigrant Advancement, the Human Rights Commission, and the HRC Commission. So we'll be talking about all of those in a single grouped hearing. So those are the topics for today. I have a number of colleague questions that have been sent by folks who aren't able to make it today. So I'm going to start out with reading those. So on the Boston Public Library, Councilor Ricardo Arroyo of District 5 asks, how much of an impact will the elimination of fines for overdue materials have on BPL's revenue? He also asks, why is BPL's capital budget decreasing by 27%? Is this because of the completion of projects last year or for some other reason? And then he asks, why does BPL have a 2.5% decrease in research services under personnel services? And then Councilor Braden asks, Councilor Liz Braden from District 9 asks about purchasing for branch library collections. Can local branch librarians have some control over purchasing? We have a very diverse city and each neighborhood is culturally very different. So local librarians should be able to purchase books for their collection. They know their population. Could we make that a bit less centralized? And then Councilor Braden also asked, when will work on the Faneuil Branch Library begin? The library closed back in November, and there is no sign of any work being done 6 months later. And then on my end, I have some questions as well on the BPL. One is just that there's a significant increase of almost $500,000 in FY22, 438,000 in contracted services compared to FY21. Just would love to understand what that increase represents. And overall, with the $3 million that we have in contracted services, sort of what kinds of things those are. And I think we're always wondering at the council which of those things could be brought in-house and which ones need to be contracted out. Would love to hear more details on the early literacy program, including the demographics of its participants and its outcomes. There, as was noted by Councilor Arroyo, a bit of a decrease in research services. So would love to understand that. And then I would really like to hear a bit of an update from the library about the sort of support for archival work. So thinking about how we're, actively using the archives that the BPL has, making them available for researchers, making them available for exhibits, for BPS curriculum stuff, how the library can support community archivists, and sort of preserve and catalog the diverse history of Boston beyond what the sort of city archives do, focused on municipal activities. Just sort of, especially with the capital project that's been done on rare books and the kind of overall revamping of some of the physical plan related to those professional research services. I just would really like to understand what the future plan is on that front. And as the library knows, I have a PhD in history myself, so I feel like I need to look out for the researchers and archivists. And I'm really proud of the fact that we have such a professional grade library in Boston, and I think we got to take care of that side of things too. And would also love to hear any comments the library has. As I think they know, I've been pushing for ways that we could use our enormous collections at the BPL to, I think in terms of public collections, we're behind the Library of Congress, but we're not behind many state and city library systems. And so we'd love to think about how we can use those resources in our archives to drive historical and cultural tourism activities and really focus on exhibits and stuff in our branch libraries. On the Bpl Capital Budget side, the capital budget, I guess Councilor Arroyo mentioned as well, went down significantly from 29 million roughly to 21 million roughly. And so just curious what that decrease in spending entails. And just I realize that may have to do with a finishing of projects, as Councilor Arroyo said, in timing, but there's also a lot of branch projects that are underway. And so just would love to understand a little bit about the reason for that significant decrease, especially given the construction pause in FY21. It feels like we should have more that gets pushed to FY22, honestly. All right, and then I have a few more questions on the public library, but we have been joined by my colleague, Councilor Ed Flynn. So I want to let him get in here. Councilor Flynn, we're starting with the BPL, if you've got library-related questions to ask.
Thank you, Councilor Block, and thank you to central staff for your hard work as well, City Council central staff. Certainly the Chinatown Branch Library is a top priority for me and the Chinatown community. I know that there is a $5 million allocated in FY22, and the status is listed as study underway. I'd like to get an update on the timeline of this project. Where are some of these sites that BPL is looking at now for the library? I need to be included in that, but I mentioned before, this is one of the most significant projects that ever happened in Chinatown in 50 years. We don't have a public library in there. So it's very important for me and for my constituents to have a library in Chinatown. And that's really a top priority. I need to get information on that. Also, there's funding for the South End Library for a library study. I'd like to talk about that as well, the next steps in improving that library. What will the community process look like for the study? And the other issue is the South Boston Library is one of the oldest public libraries branches in the city. They have a beautiful courtyard out in the back. My wife likes to go out in the courtyard, especially in the summertime. They have a beautiful courtyard, but the building itself is old, and I want to see what our short-term plans are for the South Boston Public Library, and I want to know what our long-term plans are. And I would really like to see a public library built in South Boston as well. That's all I have right now for public libraries. And also, Councilor Bach, just wanted to let you know that I support you on the public library on Cambridge Street. A lot of my constituents use that, so thank you for your leadership on that. I also support Councilor Edwards on the public library in the North End as well, because some of my constituents also use that. Certainly, all Bostonians use the Copley Library, which is also in my district, and I'm proud that the Central Library is in my district as well. But I love the libraries. I love the library system. I like it because it's open to everybody, and people have the opportunity to go there to read, to relax, and to study about different subjects that they may not know about, but it provides a great education for people. So count me as a top supporter of the public library system on the Boston City Council. Thank you, Councilor Buck.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. Yes, and I mean, personally, I'd like to compete for that label, but hugely appreciate your support. And yeah, actually, you came in right when I was about to turn to the West End Library and speaking to that. So I'll just finish a few questions on that front. And then Councilor Flynn, I will go back to you for, once I'd finished my library questions, if you've got any questions on, I had explained it at the start, but we're having this hearing that's going to focus on kind of those 5 smaller departments that all received major operating increases last year, just to kind of check in on what's going on and how that money's gone and what we're doing this year. And I know several of them are ones you paid a lot of attention to, including the Human Rights Commission and food access and H-Strong, language access. In fact, they're kind of all major ones for you. So, and then I think I just forgot, and Immigrant Advancement. So I think we're 5 for 5. So yeah, so I'll go back to you as soon as I finish my library questions. And then I've got a bunch of questions for those departments from colleagues that are written down, but we'll give you precedence since you're here in the flesh. So, or sort of.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Buck.
Great. All right. So just finishing my library questions. I mean, we have our 3rd West End Library planning meeting tonight. And so I know that process is underway, and I right now feel like comfortable with, I can ask my questions and move forward inside of that process with PFD in the library. But certainly do want to understand roughly what the timeline is for getting, a more full budget, because obviously the full capital budget for that project is not in the budget book yet because the planning hasn't concluded. So I just want to understand what the timeline will be there. As Councilor Flynn said, it's an enormously utilized library. It's actually, I think it's something like the 2nd most utilized after the Central Branch or something crazy like that. So it's a heavily, heavily used library. It serves a lot of communities, and we just really want to make sure it's well taken care of, and that there's an aggressive timeline for getting the new version in and available for folks, and also some excitement about the possibility of housing over that. So looking forward to that whole conversation. The other branch library in my district is the Parker Hill branch, and out in Mission Hill. And I think there, just would love to check in on whether there's any capital needs being addressed. We did have, last year we were having a bit of an elevator issue. I think it got resolved, but I know that's been persistent. So just would love to check in on that. And then I mentioned this already, but definitely an update on that Rare Books project in the Central Branch, which Councilor Flynn is right, it's in his district, although my constituents vote there, so I sort of claim it as well. Yeah, would love to just hear about how, and also just how, when that project is finished, the sort of operations of the rare books and manuscripts are going to improve, and how we can make those more accessible to folks. There's also a research collections preservation and storage plan for $200,000 that's still to be scheduled. So just would love to understand what the delay is, what's the plan, is that enough money? I think it's been in the capital plan for a while and it hasn't been executed. And I'm very aware, again, as a historian, that preservation and storage is not sexy, but it is really important. So would just love to know what's going on that front. Would love to hear, I think Councilor Arroyo asked how much the fees, the canceling of late fees was going to cost. I think there's 125,000 in revenue relief in the budget. Are we expecting that to become permanent? And then the budgeted external funds are down $300,000 and FTEs are level. The budget book states those facts and then says we expect changes, but it's not clear whether that's you expect external funds to go back up or you expect FTEs to have to be cut. So if we could talk about what's going on with the external funds. And then a little bit just about the contracted services increases for equity and outreach programming and reopening with expanded services. Both seem like great things. Just know a bit about that. I'd love to hear an overall update on, I know the library has done an enormous amount to transform its sort of tech goes home and related services and make, hotspots and laptops and stuff, things that people can check out. Curious as we transition back to having the physical libraries open, what the plan for kind of keeping those expanded capacities is. Would love to know. I mean, I think all of our patrons are eager to know when the libraries may be opening. And now that there's a timeline at the state and city level to some degree, would love to understand where the latest thinking is on reopening the branches. So yeah, those are, I think for now, my main, and just confirming, I think that the net zero carbon municipal buildings rule applies to new library branch buildings, but just would love to confirm that. Yeah, so those are my library questions. Councillor Flynn, I will now go to you for questions on the other departments.
Thank you, Councilor Buck. Would we start with the Office of Food Access, or is there any order that we're starting with?
No, whatever order you'd like, and you're welcome to run through all of them. Or if you want a breath, I can put some questions in, but whatever you prefer.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Buck, and you are right. The last point you made about the opening of the public library is a question I frequently receive on Zoom meetings. Residents are asking us what the status is of the opening of the public libraries. So I actually reached out to David Leonard 2 nights ago. I think they're still trying to determine the exact date. Office of Food Access, I think it's probably one of the most important departments in the city. I always say the most significant and most important social program in the federal government is the SNAP program. I have tremendous respect for the SNAP program. Certainly we work closely with the federal government and state government on food access issues. But how does the Office of Food Access reach out to residents who may face hunger-related issues? Especially those who are seniors, persons with disabilities who may speak a language other than English, and residents that live in public housing. Having access to healthy food is critical. Having access to healthy food, especially for our children, so they can go to school and learn in a healthy environment, and food access plays a critical role there. The partnerships Office of Food Access has with various city departments is also critical, whether it's Age Strong or it's or the Boston Public School System, or BCYF. So during this pandemic, Office of Food Access really stepped up to the plate and provided exceptional support to so many people in need. What are some programs that are available that would encourage and enable families to buy healthy food, such as fresh vegetables and fruits? I would love to see the Office of Food Access budget increased significantly. I think as I mentioned, I think it's the most important department, and it's closest to the people. And when you have an important department and a department that's closest to the people, you need to fund it. Office of Language Access is another critical department that my constituents rely on. Just last night, I was at a Chinatown Resident Association meeting on Zoom, and the conversation was in Cantonese. It's practically the only neighborhood organization in Chinatown that the conversation is in Cantonese. So I'm very happy about that. And we have obviously a large Cantonese speaking population, some Mandarin, but mostly Cantonese in Chinatown and throughout Boston. But Office of Language Access plays a critical role in our city. I'd like to talk more about how Office of Language Access is able to expand its role and function as an independent office. I would also like to see this budget significantly increased and recruit people that speak various languages so we can beef up our personnel in that team so we can reach more people. One of the issues I focused on when I started is when city departments are in Chinatown, I expect that these community meetings are in Cantonese. And if we go into Chinatown and we're speaking Cantonese and we're speaking English and not translating it or interpreting it into Cantonese, I consider that a failure. Boston Public Schools, I've met and talked to the superintendent many times on our outreach on language access. We are making progress in the Boston Public Schools, but we need to make more. If a city department needs to have its forms translated, what is the process of getting it translated? If a constituent shows up for a visit and they speak a language other than English, what is the process of getting an interpreter? Once this building opens, whether it's next month or sooner, and someone from Chinatown comes to City Hall and speaks Cantonese, who do they go to? Where do they go to? We have to have a system identified where we know exactly in this building who speaks what languages and who's present in the building. Certainly, my team is available to help any resident of Boston on language access issues, especially Cantonese, Mandarin, and Spanish. I'm going to go into Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement, another critical department in the city of Boston, one of the most important departments in the city. I represent a large immigrant community in District 2. I have a large, obviously, Chinese. I have a Somalian community. I also represent various residents from various countries in South America as well. Many Spanish-speaking residents, part of language access, but Immigrant Advancement also works closely with these departments, and they played a critical role during the pandemic. I'd like to know what are some of the unique programs available to workers and families who might be struggling to recover from the pandemic what assistance can Office of Immigrant Advancement provide them? I imagine that there are still many residents who still have questions regarding their immigration status, immigration cases. I know that OIA hosted immigration clinics that are very popular with constituents. Are those still going on with COVID restrictions? Are programs that offer resources to those who are concerned about their immigration cases, will they be continued? Boston is a city of immigrants. They've worked hard. They've helped build our city. They've helped build our country. And I also am concerned, and the next one is the Human Rights Commission that I'm going to go into, but Office of Immigrant Advancement, I'm concerned about this pandemic and the impact it had on our immigrant neighbors. Many people across the country blame this pandemic on immigrants unfairly. They blame it on the Chinese community unfairly. Let me go into Human Rights Commission. With the rise of anti-Asian racism and other forms of discrimination in recent years, bullying, intimidation, I think the Human Rights Commission can play a critical role in preventing and investigating hate crimes and discrimination. I'd like to have a director of special investigation within the Human Rights Commission to work to ensure that our city has the ability to fight hate crimes and discrimination. Is this possible? And this commission was established under Mayor Flynn. It was defunded after Mayor Flynn, but then under Mayor Walsh, it was brought back. And now Mayor Janey has an opportunity to put her mark on it as well. I understand maybe from reading social media that the director of the Human Rights Commission is maybe running for office. So I'm trying to see what the status is of the commission right now. If we have a temporary director at this critical time, I want to see that I want to see that office built up. I want to see it staffed. I want to see us working closely with Boston Police and human rights organizations to investigate, document, and educate on bullying, intimidation, and hate crimes. They have no place in our city. So on that one, Councilor Block, Human Rights Commission, I think it's important that we have a concrete path of short-term planning for the Human Rights Commission and long-term planning for the Human Rights Commission, because I would like to know what their short-term plans are, whether it's personnel and the outreach they're going to provide, in long-term, what the plan for Mayor Janey is over the next months as it relates to the Human Rights Commission. I think it's a critical department, and if I may tell a very brief story. When this pandemic hit, I called for the first public meeting, I think, in the country about COVID-19, and we had it at the Josiah Quincy School with Marty Martinez and Dr. Lowe from the Health Commission. And this was January 2020. And there was a young high school girl that came to the meeting, and she spoke up and she said, "Councilor Flynn, when I get on the train on the Orange Line," she said, "when I get on the train, I walk to the train, and all the white people, all the white passengers on the train get off the train because they associate me with COVID-19. And once I heard that, I said to myself, this is what's going to happen across the country, that people are going to take out this pandemic on the Asian community. And we saw a rise, obviously, in anti-Asian racism, hate crimes, bullying, intimidation. I've tried to work on this issue with my colleagues, with Mayor Walsh, with Mayor Janey. I'm going to still continue to work on this, but the Human Rights Commission is something that's very important to me. And I know it's very important to the city of Boston. And then finally, Councilor Bach, and again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about some of these issues. Age strong, our elderly, our seniors, disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Many are feeling loneliness and loss. And, you know, my staff and many other staff, city council staffs, we called a lot of seniors throughout the pandemic to see how they're doing. Some needed food, some needed someone to talk to, some needed a holiday card, or just some connection to City Hall, or a connection to someone that just wanted to listen and to hear people's concerns. So Age Strong plays a critical role in our city. I'm proud of them. When my mother was the first lady of Boston, she did a lot of outreach to our seniors. So I was proud of the outreach that my mother did as well, on making sure that our seniors were treated with respect and dignity across the city. So Age Strong, I guess my final point is, are there any outreach programs that would check in on seniors regularly and connect them to resources as we recover from the pandemic, and tying that department and Age Strong with language access, make sure we reach seniors that may not speak English, that might speak Cantonese, that might speak Spanish, that might speak other languages. So all of those languages, in my opinion, they all kind of mesh together, and they all need to work together, because if one is doing something great and the other is not involved, you know, we're missing a golden opportunity. So those departments that I highlighted, you know, what's important is they communicate, work together, and provide the best services to our residents. So Councilor Bach, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate it, and thank you for your leadership.
No, thank you so much, Councilor Flynn, for bringing all those great questions and for all your work with these departments. I feel like this is a bit of the Flynn cabinet list here. So really, really appreciate it. We've been joined by my colleague, Councilor Julia Mejia. Welcome, Councilor Mejia. And I'm going to go straight to you. So the order, we did Boston Public Library first, and then the other 5 departments. So obviously BPL will have its own hearing, and then we've got the departments that receive these major increases from the reallocation last year. So food access, language access, Immigrant Advancement, Human Rights Commission, and Age Strong. So yeah, so I've got some more questions from colleagues to read into the record, but I'm giving preference to the folks who are here. So you should go ahead and do yours.
Thank you, Chairwoman Bach. Okay, so could I read all my questions?
Yeah, exactly. If you just, yeah, that's great.
I'm gonna go right through them, okay?
Sounds great.
I'll start with the Boston Public Library, okay? So I would like some more information as to how the hours of operations are determined for each branch. Branches such as Roxbury, the branch in Roxbury are closed on Saturdays. And given that there is one of the few free spaces available to our community, I'd like to know how we can utilize these branches to be more intentional about creating spaces for our community to just be. On the language access front, we have worked in collaboration with the LCA on a new language access ordinance, which we likely will require changes in funding. And I'm just curious as to how are the new allocations being proposed for the office addressing this upcoming ordinance? The new federal, and this is another question, the new federal regulations came in from HUD. How does the new funding address the implementation of these standards? For the Office of Immigrant Advancement, I'd like for them to talk a little bit more about their goals, specifically around increasing media and social media coverage. What is their reasoning behind this goal? And will there be a focus on local ethnic media? And you know, there are a lot of off the beaten path spaces. It's not just El Mundo and El Planeta and the usual suspects. But, you know, I'm curious about other podcasts and other spaces where we know a lot of our residents are tuning into. So I just kind of really want to be more intentional about their outreach efforts. So would be curious about what they plan to do. I would like for them to describe the function of the 2 new full-time positions. I'm particularly interested in learning about the economic integration specialist, like, you know, as the chair of small business and workforce development, this is key to us. So I'm curious about what that's going to look like. And then for the Human Rights Commission, could they come prepared to speak a little bit about their efforts around addressing the digital divide beyond the publication of their upcoming study? What action items do they plan to take to make an impact on municipal broadband in our city? And then for Age Strong Commission, I'd like for the Age Strong Commission to come prepared to speak about how we're reaching out to certain harder to reach senior populations in the era of COVID, specifically as more and more services are being moved online. And how is the Age Strong Commission working with organizations like the LGBTQ senior housing to ensure that our LGBTQ seniors have access to affordable housing as well? So those are my questions. That's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for those great questions, Councilor Mejia.
I want to give a shout out to my chief of my policy director, Jacob DeBlakecourt. He is the one that has been working diligently on this budget and preparing all of these working session questions and helping us be prepared to advocate on behalf of our constituents. So that's all Jacob, y'all. I just show up and look cute. Nah, I'm just joking.
We all stand on the shoulders of our staff. I think that's true for all of us counselors. So yeah, no, shout outs to Jacob on my team, to Emily, who's been awesome. Councilor Flynn, is it Sophia for you? Yeah.
It's Sophia. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the team behind the team. We really appreciate them. Great. Well, thank you, Councilors Flynn and Mejia. I am going to go back to reading questions that were submitted by some colleagues who weren't able to join today. So feel free to stay on, but also feel free to drop off. I know everyone's got a lot going on. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks. And yeah, so going first, I'll go to the questions for these assorted other departments from Councilor Arroyo. So Councilor Arroyo asked for food access. Can the Office of Food Access talk a bit about the decreases in external funds, including the Children's Hospital Boston Eats grant, the Double Up Food Bucks grant, and the Strategic Planning grant? What did these grants fund, and will those operations be funded, if they will, with these decreases? And then if the Office of Food Access could talk about what the new investments in this year's budget will fund, and what they specifically did with the increased investment in their operating budget last year that was reallocated over from the BPD budget. And then Councilor Arroyo asked, what will staffing sort of FTEs look like for OFA in FY22, and what did it look like in FY21? And I think because of the way it is in the budget book, it's a little bit hard to track those things. So we'd just love a more detailed breakdown on that front. Language and communication access from Councilor Arroyo. He asks, what did LCA's budget and staffing look like under ONS? Or what portion of ONS's budget and staffing in FY21 was dedicated to language and communications access functions? So basically, again, for those watching at home, the Language and Communications Access Office has been moved in this year's proposed budget from being within the Office of Neighborhood Services to being its own office under the Equity Cabinet. And so the question is it's a little bit hard comparing apples and oranges to tell how much LCA was funded previously and how much it's funded now. So just would love some clarity on that. Can Language Access talk about its anticipated $900,000 in contracts? What will these contracts be for? What efforts will the office make to procure diverse vendors? And then again, specifically, what did Language Access do with its increased investment last year from the BPD overtime budget? And in the request for information, LCA provided a breakdown of employees that are moving out of ONS, and the table only shows 2 employees. Is Language Access still planning on moving 3 positions out of ONS over to Language Access? And my impression on that, this is Kenzie, not Ricardo, is that that might have to do with the director leaving. And so there were 3 budgeted positions, but there's only actually 2 people who are currently in post who are moving. But I think it would be great for the council to get some clarity on that. And then Councilor Arroyo also asks, when does Language Access anticipate the office being fully staffed with its 5 FTEs that it's going up to in this budget? So there's a proposed increase, but when will that actually be real? Then Councilor Arroyo asked about Immigrant Advancement. What specifically did the Office of Immigrant Advancement do with its increased investment last year from the BPD overtime budget? And then in the budget book, one of the performance measures is the number of equity-oriented recommendations made to city, state, and federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, and for-profit organizations. Can Immigrant Advancement talk about some of the recommendations that were made? There's 15 projected in FY21. So what does that look like? Then the Human Rights Commission, what will the $100,000 increase for anti-discrimination supports in the Human Rights Commission's budget fund specifically? This is located under the contracted services line item. And then HRC is also expecting an increase of 4 full-time equivalents. When do they expect that it'll fill these personnel positions? How many complaints did the Human Rights Commission receive in the past year? What specifically did Human Rights Commission do with its increased investment last year from the reallocated BPD money? And 2 more for the Human Rights Commission, and then I'll be going to Councilor Edwards, who has joined us, from Councilor Arroyo still, as the overseer for citizens to ensure that recommendations from the Boston Police Reform Task Force are implemented. Can the Human Rights Commission give an update on progress made by the city to implement those recommendations, and have they received an update on that progress? And when does the Human Rights Commission anticipate that the Health Inequities Now plan will be released? So those were all from Councilor Arroyo. And now I'll go to Councilor Edwards.
Hey.
Hey. Great to see
Okay, so I have a couple on Age Strong, and then there's HRC. So on Age Strong, the biggest issue I've been hearing about in my district is the cab vouchers. So they've eliminated them for some reason, or the cab coupons, and they've eliminated them. And that has been, I think, one of the biggest requests as to why seniors aren't getting those back. We're having influx, I guess, of money, and why their mobility is less of a priority. And we've also been looking for a shuttle in the North End and Charlestown for seniors specifically, because both are because of what it takes to get to a grocery store, and both of them is a great deal. We have a highway right between the North End and the new Shaw's or whatever it is downtown. And so there was a request about that. We wanted the update on the East Boston Senior Center. I know it's currently under construction. Last time we were picking a vendor for it, he had wage theft violation issues, but it seems like he's back. He was picked anyway. And they seem to go through their design review, but that was it. Let's see, how much did H Strong spend on contracting period? I guess I would love to know that when it comes to these kinds of contracts. We had a big issue with, it wasn't just H Strong. Oh, actually it was H Strong who put out the contract that I think Costa Fruits were concerned about. Either way, this is about the home delivery of meals. And it seemed that the contract that they chose was not even an MBE, came in above, and seemed to have already been planned for before. So there was a real concern about whether there was equity or concerns in the contracting. On the HRC, as you know, the biggest concern I have is the fact that the HRC is outdated. They have, forgetting the credit issue, literally they haven't included pregnancy discrimination, they haven't included domestic workers, and these are new laws that we've had. They also aren't consistent with the HRC statute of limitations, or excuse me, with the MCAD statute of limitations. I think we're still at 150 days, and the state is at 300 for you to file. There seems to be no clarification. There's no website that I know of, and there's no clarification of how to file with the HRC, considering that we have certain rights that the state doesn't, like the rights, like your status as a parent is protected in the city of Boston. And the HRC's jurisdiction is for all employers with 6 or more. We have the most progressive and I think, one of the largest jurisdictions to enforce civil rights legislation, and no website and no form to actually file one. So this is a year and some odd months after we hired an HRC director, and I don't understand why what's taking so long. Short of, I think that director is now running for office, right?
Filed.
So there might be going to be some clarification as to whether they're going to maintain their job and run, who's going to be the new director, and when, literally a deadline as to when the website will be up and they will be accepting claims on behalf of people in the city of Boston. So those are my kind of big stuff right now.
Great. Yeah, and Councillor Flynn had some similar questions about the HRC sort of leadership staffing plan. So we will definitely we'll be pushing on that front. Great. And anything else? Because otherwise I'll go back to reading some of the questions from colleagues who.
Let me see again from the.
So it's Age Strong and Human Rights Commission, then language access, immigrant advancement. I should just read my list. The Boston Public Library.
So language access, there was a back and forth over whether the literacy belonged in that house. And I would like to know if that landed anywhere. The teaching people how to read was one of the issues that Councilor Mejia brought up. And they pushed back initially saying that that is part of workforce development and skill set development and not part of language access. I think I'd like some clarification as to where that belongs, mostly because there's more money coming in for workforce development right now through either it's mitigation for Suffolk Downs or there's other forms of mitigation through what you call COVID recovery. But either way, I'd like to know where it's housed and to know that I agree with her that there should be an investment in the city and making sure we have a high literacy rate. I just don't know if it's language access or not. So that was one thing. And then it was language, immigrant advancement. What happened with the municipal ID? That was something under Chief Arroyo at the time. And I remember working with him on helping come up with the RFP and whatnot when I was at OHS. And then it kind of went away. Now, one of the concerns had been that, do we want all of the documents of every single person who might have different immigration status in one location? That was one of the concerns. I thought that we worked that out. And this is what was beautiful about this is we didn't need state legislation. So I thought an RFP went out years ago and then it just died. But talk about something, meeting people where they are if we're going to be doing immigrant advancement and acknowledgement and empowerment. Why not have a municipal ID? Or where the hell did it go? So, all right, now I'm done.
Great, sounds good. Yeah, and I think there's also there's some literacy related programming listed under the public library as well. And I know that's something they have some initiatives on. So I think, yeah, getting some clarity for the council on where literacy sits in the system.
All right.
Good thing.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Councilor Edwards. Appreciate you. Have a great day. And I see we've been joined by Councilor Michael Flaherty. Councilor Flaherty, welcome.
Yes, good morning. Madam Chair, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. You've
Is my
been out a little
question
bit.
ready?
Yeah.
Is this a little better?
Yeah, that's better. Okay, yeah. So if you want to jump right in, and you can do all your questions at once. So it's
Sure.
the public library, and then we've got a set of smaller departments: immigrant advancement, Age Strong,
No
food
problem.
access. You've got the list. So go ahead.
Yep, I'll just be very brief. If I could just start with the Age Strong, obviously our elderly commission, older adults are among our fastest growing population in the city. So I just wanted to see what, if any, investments we're making with respect to digital literacy, teaching digital literacy to our older adults. There are programs that Age Strong promotes with any partner organizations, and also where is the funding from the federal sources, whether it's the CARES Act, will some of those funds be spent on this particular issue? Food access, obviously, I'm happy to see the increase in the operating budget. How many FTEs does that team have? And are we looking to expand the FTEs? Obviously, this is a critical issue, as we saw throughout the pandemic. So making sure that they're appropriately and sufficiently staffed as we move forward, that would be great. In the Office of Language Access, clearly there is, we clearly have, significant input, in having a standalone partner clearly has been critical to us. So I just want to make sure that the department is the right size and it's fitting all of our multicultural, needs for our growing city. And then obviously Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement, same thing on that. Just want to make sure that we saw that they nearly doubled the department's operating budget, and FTEs will increase by one person. And we're also adding an additional program coordinator there. So making sure that that is also sufficiently staffed. And our libraries, obviously, our commissioner does a phenomenal job. He's been very responsive anytime me or my team has reached out to him with a library issue or concern. So as you know, Madam Chair, our libraries can be the hubs of activity in our neighborhoods. And also, it's an opportunity for kids to learn, and we need to continue to invest in that programming. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about, what our libraries are doing to partner with our Boston Public Schools with respect to kind of the lost learning that took place during the pandemic, and helping us get these kids back up to their grade level would be great. And I'd like to learn more about the construction of the Chinatown Library branch. That's something I've been advocating for many years now, too long, quite frankly. So let's get an update on that, and hopefully let's get that place open. And Chinatown deserves it. They've waited long enough. So thank you, Madam Chair. That's sort of a little snapshot of my issue.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. And those were great and succinct and efficient. So appreciate that.
Madam Chair, I can have those sent to Shane written.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you send them over, that just saves them the work of typing it up.
Great. That'd be great. I'll send them over.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. And now I'm going to go back to reading from a few colleagues who weren't able to join us. So I just want to finish Councillor Arroyo's questions with the H-Strong Commission. So Councillor Arroyo asked, can H-Strong talk about the decrease in some of its external funds, including the mobility assistance program, MCOA respite? One second. MCOA respite and the Elderly Universal Fund. What do these grants fund, and how will the department make up for these decreases? Then why is H-Strong's programs and partnerships and transportation line items being reduced in FY22? I think on the transportation front, we all want to know about the taxi vouchers. I think there was a reference in the budget book to sort of making like a new updated system, but definitely I think the lack of those are being felt by our elders. And then again, Councillor Arroyo asks, what specifically did H-Strong do with its increased investment last year from reallocated BPD overtime? So those are his questions. And then I want to turn to, I have a couple more questions from Councillor Liz Braden of District 9. So Councillor Braden asked the food access team, can more money be appropriated? Oh, sorry, not for food access. This is actually for immigrant advancement. Can more money be appropriated for very basic level ESOL classes for immigrants that have little or no English proficiency? Because the workforce development funds are focused on higher level language skills. So there are very few resources to help beginners. And so that's something I know Councillor Braden has been consistently pushing on. And then she also asks, we have one senior center in District 9, the Veronica Smith Senior Center, run by a volunteer board and staffed by H-Strong. And Councillor Braden is asking whether we can get them technical assistance for grant writing, financial support for technology programming equipment, computer classes and tablets. This relates to Councillor Flaherty's question about digital equity for our seniors. And then property management. The center needs a new security system or camera so that visitors can be buzzed in. So those are questions from Councillor Braden. And then I will turn back to my questions for these departments. So one second, let me queue those up and just double check that I don't have any other colleagues. Great. One question is just, I guess I'll start with food access. So I think just, again, food access, because I guess what I'll just ask at the top here of all of our departments, and I'll repeat this, but it's a little bit related to what Councilor Arroyo has been asking for. Like, a lot of these departments have been subsumed within larger departments. And so the level of detail that the council has on your budget is limited. And so it'd be great for you to come prepared to talk to us in a little bit more detail. So for instance, what costs are under the $765,000 in non-personnel funding for food access? Can you talk about specifically how you did spend the money last year, and then the money that was reallocated to food access? And then what will the impact of the $330,000 in increased funding proposed for this year be? Can you talk about your number of full-time equivalents, and the detail on your contracted services, including sort of contractors who are local, minority, and or women-owned businesses? What metrics do we have to measure the current food demand? So obviously it's surged like crazy in FY21, and food access did amazing work to try to meet that demand, and set a whole bunch of programs up from scratch. Just would love to know sort of what things are looking like for FY22, and sort of what food access's current responsibilities are and how we expect them to kind of change this year as we transition to the post-pandemic world and residents go back to school and work in person and such. The double up food bucks, we've asked a bunch of different departments about this, but that also went from 160,000 to 0. What does that mean for folks? And same thing with the Children's Hospital, Boston Eats went from 80,000 to 0. So I think this Children's Hospital and Boston Eats money and the double up food bucks is spread across food access, H Strong, and BCYF, and it's all zeroing out. And so we just want to understand what the transition looks like there. And then just a thing I'm asking folks in general is what their outreach to the Native and Indigenous community is, because the thing that's come to our attention, and we've got the North American Indian Center of Boston on the edge of my district. I think that's come to our attention is just that because it's a proportionately small group, they don't always get included in the outreach that our departments do. And so especially around food access, we want to make sure that that outreach is happening. Then on language access, again, same, I'll just echo Councilor Arroyo's question about what was the actual language access budget last year? What is it this year? Can we get a like for like on both personnel and non-personnel expenditures? Do we have a goal of providing translation at more public meetings? What does that look like? Can we just clarify whether LCA assists departments with ASL translation? I think that they do. I know at one point we had even talked about hiring somebody onto staff, and just would love to understand that piece. And in terms of accessible information on social media, was wondering if Language and Communications Access has any sort of policies or involvement there. So for instance, putting out alt text for graphics and digital posters, which can then be more easily translated. Whereas for if you just have the image, you can't really, it can't be read, and it also can't be translated easily. And sort of how, just a little bit more clarity on how the new policy that was issued, because there's a couple things going on, right? The administration itself just issued an updated language access policy. And really what we need is for language access to come and explain how they're implementing that and what that looks like in terms of resources and new metrics and goals and all of that. And then there's also, as Councilor Mejia alluded to, her ordinance that is on the council docket that we're considering and partnering with the administration on. And then there's what we used to be doing. So I think just like a bunch of clarity for the council on what has the department now newly committed to, what's that going to entail? Is there enough staffing in this budget to do that? And then what further staffing would we need if we were going into Councilor Mejia's into ordinance? And just a bit more about this research analyst role and what it's going to do. And then if you guys have a bird's eye view on what departments actually have budgets for providing language access accommodation, and kind of how you track what the resources are that departments are putting forward in addition to these 5 FTEs that you have, a little bit more info on what the department training for protocols for language access includes. And then there's a place in the budget book where it says that LCA has $897,000 $585 in contracted services, but later in the request for information, it says LCA doesn't have any existing contracts. So if we can just clear up what that contracted services versus contracts issue is and what that budgeted amount is planned to be used for, or if that's just a new contract, it would be great to understand. Then on immigrant advancement, you could speak to the Office of Immigrant Advancement External Fund, where that money comes from and what it's used for, and what are the contracted services paid with these funds. So there's a lot of contractual services and external funds that doubled from FY21. Are these mini grants to immigrant-led nonprofit organizations, or is that something else? Can you talk a little bit about what the outcomes of the mini grants are and kind of what projects that folks are doing? And I think we're always curious. I mean, mini grants themselves can be a godsend for lots of our programs in immigrant communities, but always curious sort of what the plan to scale up is, or sort of identify things that should continue past one season. Is the goal of the foreign trained immigrant professionals pilot program for the internship host to end up hiring folks at the end of their internship, or will there be job search support? Like, what's that last piece of the pipeline there? What are the most common services and programs and critical information that the Office of Immigrant Advancement sort of does referrals for the folks reaching out to it? And what types of resources does it help immigrant serving organizations to acquire? I think Councilor Roy already asked about what policy recommendations they make. What have been the conclusions from data from any of the recent surveys to identify concerns and problems that immigrants face in Boston? What are the most persistent problems, and what are we suggesting folks do, or what are we doing? Under goals, it's also listed that there are 500 immigrant serving organizations have been connected to resources to better serve their constituents. We assume that's the number of unique times that an organization gets connected to resources rather than a number of unique organizations, since we don't think there's 500 organizations that Moya is directing with. Is there data connecting with, sorry, is there data on how many organizations they are connecting with? And then, I already asked about the equity-oriented recommendations that they're making. Why is Suitcase Stories being discontinued? Do Know Your Rights presentations include tenant and housing rights, or are they solely focused on immigration rights? And then I had the chance to speak to the inaugural class of this Immigrants Lead Boston program, which seemed to be fantastic. A really great kind of civic boot camp that a lot of folks were using. Would love to hear about sort of what the learnings were, what the next steps are on that. I see it's being continued, but just would love to hear more detail on that. And then just in general, I think I said this already, but I might not have, no, not with immigrant. Just a real breakdown of how did the money get spent last year? What's the new money doing this year? And kind of, are there things that we're on a multi-year path to achieving? Do we kind of, Moya has grown quite a lot in size over the last few years. Do we feel like we're kind of hitting our stride with some of the things the city had hoped to address? Just kind of more of that, like where we're going sense from the department. Then Human Rights Commission. I have a few detailed questions. So is the 273,000 other charge that's under department personnel, is that the commission's members' stipends, or is it for additional employees or something else? If we can just have a little bit of clarity there. In FY21, there were 6 interactions listed with city departments on compliance with the HRC ordinances. How are those initiated? Does the HRC audit specific department, or are those due to complaints? If the latter, sort of how can we be more proactive? And also to Councilor Edwards' point, what's the mechanism by which people are submitting complaints, since it's not a super public website? And then what will the increase to 6 FTEs from 2 enable the HRC to accomplish and be more proactive? Kind of, are we actually heading into that phase shift? I think, what's the situation with department leadership, but also the plan for kind of getting this up and running in a really robust way, because as Councillor Flynn says, the time is now. And then, more detail on what this $100,000 increase in contracted services represent. And then it says in your metrics that 100% of your complaints resulted in inquiries or referrals. What's the breakdown of inquiries versus referrals, and who do we refer people to, and what constitutes an inquiry? How many hearings is the HRC held based on a complaint, if any? I think, again, sort of what's the opportunity to be more proactive in protecting folks against racially motivated violence or harassment, and especially, with what we're seeing with our AAPI community. How can we be more proactive in protecting the rights and safety of our LGBTQ community, particularly trans and non-binary individuals? How can we address violence and discrimination, including in the workplace and the housing market? When we had the authors of the Suffolk study on at our fair housing hearing last year, they mentioned that trans individuals were more discriminated against than any other subgroup. So just would love to hear what the HRC is doing about that. And we'll also ask fair housing about that. The request for information answer supplied to the council outlines some of the great work HRC is doing in a bunch of areas, but just curious sort of what the short-term goals or outputs are for each of those areas. So like securing immigrants' rights, it outlined a specific workflow, but a few of the others didn't. So if we could just a bit more detail on that, what the HRC's work has been on workplace discrimination, following up on Councilor Arroyo's question, how much have they interfaced with the Boston Police Reform Task Force? Have they made any information requests yet to BPD or the task force? Sort of what's the involvement there, and what's the nature of their partnership with the BPD Civil Rights Unit? So that is Human Rights Commission. And now I get to Age Strong, which I think is my last one. And I'm just checking one more time to make sure, we don't have any other colleagues. So the Age Strong Commission. So sort of what's the current status of the taxi coupon program while studies conducted? Same as Councilor Edwards, we've been getting a bunch of questions from our folks in Amy Lowell House in the West End and other parts of the district about the taxi vouchers. And so would just love to understand whether there's an interim plan, and if there's not an interim plan, what the length of the study is, and sort of why we're at this transition point we're in. Would just love to understand sort of, I think Age Strong, this is actually a question also for food access. I sort of asked it, but both Age Strong and food access have gotten some significant external funding as part of the kind of federal aid moment that we're in, which is great and super needed. And so just thinking about how we avoid cliff effects and sort of what the plan will be to build out capacity that we can sustain. Would love to hear a bit about that. If you can, there's a 13.7% reduction in the programs and partnerships budget. If you can speak to that a bit. If you can speak to any partnership you have with the North American Indian Center of Boston around Indigenous elders, and sort of whether Age Strong has that relationship, and if so, what it looks like. And then if you can speak about the events budget increase and the FY22 investments under contracted services. And then Age Strong has done some amazing phone bank outreach to older adults, both at the height of COVID and throughout, to let them know about Age Strong resources. And of course, its phone line has been huge for vaccine access for older adults in the city. So first of all, just, enormous thanks for that. And then just wondering sort of what we've heard about, what we've learned from that in terms of how to keep reaching out to older adults who might be isolated. So they're not really in one of our like elder community center communities or housing communities, and they're sort of solo. It feels like those phone calls were a good way to reach into them. And how are we thinking about that going forward? What has the call volume this year been? Like what number of these calls about vaccines have you dealt with? How many are housing related? What do you say are sort of the most frequent ones you get? I know there's an effort to work on addressing hoarding challenges. Can you speak a little bit about that? I think that's a partnership. I'm trying to remember with which other department or entity. So speaking about that would be great. Does Age Strong have any sort of elder focused housing resources that it's able to connect people with? Or is it mostly a question of sending them over to OHS? It'd be great to know. And then does Age Strong do wellness or health checks on older residents, or reach out to residents that neighbors are concerned about? And if so, are there ways that Age Strong can be better supported in this by other departments or anything? So that is a set of questions for, and then I guess just again, just as much clarity as the department can provide about what they did with their money last year, what they're planning to do with the money this year, what staffing looks like, all of that would be great. We will, just so folks know, when we have that hearing, we'll be doing a bit of a round robin where we hear from all 5 of those departments, and then we do questions for all, so that we're not eternally there. But it just means I'll ask departments to be efficient in their presentations. And so if there are factual questions that were asked by the council today, they get forwarded over. It would be great to get sort of factual answers in written answer form instead of all on the slides, just because of time constraints. So, but we're grateful for the work of all these departments. Thanks to my colleagues who either came today or sent in questions. We'll be, our amazing central staff will be typing up these questions, and we'll be getting them over to the relevant departments. And then grateful as ever as well to my budget director, Emily Brown. So with that, seeing no further questions or counselors, this working session of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee is now adjourned. Thank you all.